Hello, everyone. It's a fantastic Thursday, and I am joined here by a fantastic guest that I've known for a long time throughout the industry. This is the first time, though, we're actually talking on video. Maybe one day we'll get to meet in person with the lockdown easing. But I am joined here with the fantastic Karen Fugle, who is a career coach, a mentor, an executive coach at SleepingGiant Consulting, and someone that I've been closely following for the last few years when she set up her fantastic and well-renowned and acclaimed business. But before that, Karen has a great background in the architecture industry as a CAD manager and consultant. So you have worked in many architecture practices before. Karen, it's so good to have you here today. How are you?
It's so good to be here. Thank you very much for having me. And it's nice to be talking to you, actually.
Yeah, we're both real people, aren't we? We're not just floating around on LinkedIn, as it would feel this year.
See you lots online. We bump into each other lots online, but talking, it's like, well, accents. We've got accents. This is,
Yeah, I know. And also, obviously, we've had some nice messages in between, and I think you have a fantastic sense of humor. So my kind of person to get onto the podcast. But Karen, let's explain to everyone what the SleepingGiant is, because we could talk about, what brought you to that point. But obviously, you've been doing some amazing stuff with Reba, I think like the Reba Future Architects program and stuff. So what is SleepingGiant Consulting?
It's me. It's just me.
Yay! But that's good. We like you.
It's me listening. Can I explain how I got there? Because that kind of explains why. Because I was working actually as a consultant, a BIM consultant at the time, and I was in John McCaslin Architects at the time. I was going in weekly as their consultant, actually, and it was during the recession. And it was a really very interesting time in the industry, and loads of places were letting people go. And, I was going into multiple, a different firm every day. So I could just see the tension, and I could see, people coming up to me and going, oh, I might be on the red list soon. I might have to leave, I can't take a holiday. I have to work kind of thing. I might.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, it was a really interesting time. And it was a time where I was valued as a BIM consultant, because that was seen as like the thing that was going to be the cutting edge, and that was going to get you the next job in the really uncertain time of change kind of thing. So it was like, they weren't getting rid of me. They were just getting rid of the staff kind of thing. And I suddenly realized, after talking to these people, and I'd been working at John McCaslin for years, so I had a good relationship there. And I realized that I cared more about the people than I did about the technology at that point. I had one of those careers that I kind of fell into, not so much intention as that's where I should go. And that was the point when I said, how can I work more with the architects about helping them, especially in that time of uncertainty and change, and helping them transition through all of that and work through their feelings. How can I kind of do that when all I've done is CAD and BIM and all the technical side of architecture? And it took me another year after that kind of epiphany to kind of go, okay, well, I need to do something, but I'm not sure. I didn't know what it was. I need to do something else. And I left my consultancy firm, and I started working with a business developer. And I thought at first that he might help me, mentor me in helping me find this next step in my career. But we ended up working together. I ended up mentoring small businesses, which was a great break from the architecture industry. So went from consulting to kind of the mentoring. And then someone said, have you tried coaching? And I went, oh, what's that? I was like, oh, that's not where you tell people what to do. It's where you listen and help them come to their own solutions. And I kind of went on this 2-day course, and I went, well, this is, where they try and sign you up at the end of the 2 days or whatever.
Oh, really?
One of those kind of 200 people in a room, and they try to sign you on the dotted line. I was like, this is really interesting this weekend. It's opened my eyes. But if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it properly. I think I'm like many architects like that. If you're going to do it, you have to kind of aim for that bit of perfection. So I kind of took myself on a coaching journey and went on went on a proper course. And that was one thing that I didn't really want to do. I didn't want to retrain. I didn't want to learn anything new, kind of start again. But, I didn't want to own my own business. But those are all things that I did anyway. So that's
Amazing.
when I thought, I can't go back into the industry as a consultant. I can't tell the architects what to do anymore. I have to go back in and coach. I have to go back in with a completely different mindset of helping architects, think about they are the solution in the room. It's within them. How can I help them get to the next step? How can I be their sounding board? How can I help them on their career journey? Because I really want to see them do the best they can, be the best people that they can.
Amazing. Yeah. It's really interesting because there's a lot of parallels. Why? Because in my career, I was working in an architectural practice as well. And I went on a bit of a different journey. I ended up going into recruitment because I kind of like the idea of talking to people. And for instance, I wanted to do something different. I really wanted to do something different. And I kind of felt a bit lost at the time in the role of a Part 2 architectural assistant. And so I was like, you know what, I'll just go off and do something else. But I really resonate to the passion that you have for people, and I think that's amazing. And it's coaching is a bit of an interesting one, and I think it's a timely topic because I've started doing a bit of coaching, Karen. Now I've been doing it. Yeah, thank you. Oh, look, you are the real deal, and I admire what you do, and it's amazing. And so I do a little bit of coaching as well, and it is not. I get it that you've really, first of all, you've got to be passionate about it, haven't you? Because you've got to, as you say, you've got to really listen to people. So, and it does require a level of commitment. But I love what you said, that actually people make their own decisions. Coaching isn't necessarily about they come see you for an hour and you go, okay, like a doctor, you go, yep, and go on their way. That totally doesn't work. And I've learned quite quickly that it's listening. And my understanding of it is that you talk with the person. Key thing is listening, as you said, and then hopefully they come to their own conclusions, and you kind of challenge that ideology a little bit and you nurture it. That's my understanding, and I'm someone that hasn't done it properly. What was it like when you started doing it, Karen? And how do you kind of go about it now if someone comes to you at Sleeping Giant?
Well, when I first started, I reached back to all my old contacts of people who I'd known for at least 5 years, I think. And I said, hey, I'm now a coach and I need some clients. Do you want to come on this journey with me? And a couple of them said, yes, would love to, kind of thing. And I look back on it now, and I think the main thing that I remember about that time is I had to really try and control that urge to give advice. Really, really difficult. And I ended up being able to do it in the session with a client of not jumping in and going, oh, I know how to do this, and oh, you should do that. But I would save it all up, and I would get to the end, and then at the end of the session, I'd let it all out.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really working that well, I could do it for a living. So it took me, at least the first, 100 to 200 hours of doing this to kind of really get a rein on, it's not about me, it's all about you, kind of thing. It's a lot of practice to really kind of listen.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so I think that what's important distinction here, because in terms of what you do or coaching and consulting, there's an element, I'm sure, where you're helping, as you said, the architectural professionals. You're doing that. But what's really interesting, and something I haven't touched upon yet, is I'm sure you've been involved with businesses, and that's a totally different set of skills that you have to do as well. But I'm sure it's equally exciting. So have you got involved with many architectural practices and stuff on the business side? And have you found that a rewarding experience where you've learned a lot as well?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think that the split between who I work with are those who are sole practitioners.
Right.
And smaller firms. And then, and that's, half the people I work with. And then the other half are the architects in the larger firms, because they're a completely different game of what the two are talking about. So when I'm working with the smaller businesses, or even the leaders of a larger organization, and it gets a bit more strategic, kind of, it's kind of looking a lot more at the bigger picture. Especially when you're talking to sole practitioner architects, it's more about look, we know you're so stuck in the day-to-day element of doing all the work and all the meetings that you don't have time to look at your business. So this is it. This is the time now when we can pull you out and go, right, what's happening with the next 6 months? What have you got on your calendar? How you need? And I think having run my own businesses, companies for as a consultant, and now this one has given me a good grounding and kind of knowing what's that like, what the challenges are like, kind of thing. So, yeah.
Well, it makes complete sense, and I think that it's a totally different set of obstacles. What's interesting? So I've recently joined an architecture practice called Ackroyd Lowry. So I help them on the recruitment front. But it's really interesting being involved in that practice at this size, because there are about 25 people now, and they actually accelerated. They grew from like 15 people during the pandemic to 25, and so it's interesting seeing the practice at that journey. And as you said, there's a lot of decisions growing at the moment, because when you rapidly accelerate from a smaller architecture practice to a medium, now almost to a large, it's been really interesting to see. But that's where I can see as well the value of coaching and being involved in that, is so that you can especially help practices going through change. It's really, really valuable. But I noticed at the moment, then, Karen, you've been involved with Reba, and you've been working with I think the Reba Future Architects, on the topic of leadership. Now, imagine you can kind of get leadership on both ends of the scales, actually, isn't it? You touched upon, the person in the architecture practice in a big company, and I'm sure there's loads of challenges on leadership there. How do you get people to follow you and do all this stuff, as well as from a business standpoint? But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that topic that you're passionate about, and you've been talking on leadership. I'm sure you've seen a lot and you've learned a lot.
It's been a really, really good past 6 months that are working with the RIBA on the Future Leaders Conference. And this is aimed at, I think the average age was
Amazing.
of the participant was kind of 30 to 45 kind of thing. So
cool.
if I'm right. And they were more from the larger practices. So, really kind of that mid-level of architects, which is mostly, the kind of people who I work with, the people who are kind of in that transition between, leading themselves to suddenly stepping up and leading a team. And how do I manage that? And how do I manage suddenly leading somebody who I thought was my friend, kind of thing, and being above them, and how do I manage my time and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so when I started this, work with the RIBA, I thought, gosh, what do I really think about leadership? Have I actually taken myself on a leadership journey? And I thought, well, I better do this. I better kind of do a bit of reflection here and think about what leadership actually means for me. And I had to think about it, and I was like, well, I remember a time when somebody said, "Oh, you were quite good at leading a team back then." And I thought, "Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know. Was I? Oh, thanks." And then I thought back to another time when somebody said to me, "You're leading the company in the wrong direction," and I was like, "Oh." Yeah,
wow.
That was really
that's a strong one, isn't it?
Oh, I didn't know I was leading them in any direction, but this is interesting.
Well, Karen, it might have been someone who didn't feel passionate about Revit or BIM at the time, so I wouldn't take that one personal, just because.
And I was thinking, gosh, I've never really thought about. When I think about leadership, you always think of somebody ahead of you. You think of somebody fairly senior. You think of somebody out there who's kind of, But when you really start to look at leadership around yourself, it's a whole different ball game. And I thought, okay, let's go back further. Let's see where leadership started in my life. And I kind of went back further to when I was a teenager, and I told the story at the RIBA conference where I was. Where in 1985, this is how far we're going back. I know most of the audience wasn't born then. 1985, and it was there were there were ships with nuclear weapons in the waters around New Zealand. Okay, and there was the Greenpeace ship, the Rainbow Warrior, which was in the Auckland Harbour, and they were protesting about these nuclear ships. And these French double agents came over, got themselves on the boat, and they planted a couple of bombs, and a couple of people died. And that, and so it really kind of, there was this whole spotlight on that time in New Zealand, and it was the catalyst for the waters around New Zealand becoming nuclear free. So it was a really big thing. And I was kind of 15 at the time, and I was like, I'm going to join Greenpeace. I'm going to join this group. I know I came from a family of conservationists, and we were, particularly sort of keen about stuff. So I joined Greenpeace, and my first kind of role was, what I think is my first kind of leadership experience was petitioning against the mining in Antarctica. I thought, let's just leave one continent without any mining. I'll get a petition, and we'll get 100 signatures. And this is, we didn't have computers these days. It was kind of door knocking. Can you please sign my petition? We don't want mining in Antarctica. And I was a real introvert. This was really stepping out of my comfort zone. And my friends thought I was crazy. The principal called me into his office, and he said, "Are you going to bring communism into this school?" I was like, what's communism? But I felt really that I was being authentic and had a sense of purpose, and it was strongly kind of aligned with my values and beliefs. So, and that's what made it. And it was kind of the first time that I was thinking beyond myself. I was kind of making ethical decisions and thinking about the bigger picture. So I thought, okay, well, that's kind of where I first started leading. And that's not what I think about when I think about leadership necessarily, but that's kind of, so I think you need to kind of look back and look at the wider experience of leadership in your life and recognize that it's not just at work, it shows up all over.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And it's interesting because our conversation started going through the architecture social. And so that's something I set up during, because I was on furlough, because last year, because, architecture industry really, unfortunately, architecture can be like the canaries in the mines. We're at the front line because we win work, we build projects, and we're the first on the ripple. And it was the same with recruitment. And so I got put on furlough, and I remember thinking like, oh man, and I spent a month or two, it's like drinking wine, going on Netflix and stuff. And then in the end, I had to take a bit of accountability because even though I don't practice architecture per se anymore, there's kind of a reason that I went into it. And I think that we all have that part of us. You have it as well with your business and going out there, but I kind of needed to do something. And I set up the architecture social during that time. And so that was kind of nice because it was accountability. And I guess there's a sense of leadership involved in that, because whenever you're doing like a social enterprise, you have to push it forward. And that was kind of my way of dealing with a tricky situation. And trying and bringing, I guess, a sense of leadership into it. What I was going to ask you is that you must have seen, due to your job, you're well connected. You must have seen a lot of people during this tricky time. And like the way there's some good things that have come out of it. Like we're talking on Zoom and we've met and we were in the social and we've had nice conversations. But what did you see last year, Karen? It doesn't have to be directly in your business, but around you. How did you see people respond during that time? And was there any good examples of leadership as well? Maybe some good stories that come out of it as well as the bad?
I think it was a really, really tricky year for a lot of people. And there was a real need for connection and being able to really have a place where you could go and talk about what was going on, and not talk about work necessarily, but just the whole experience of it kind of thing. And we recognised that in the Women in Architecture Committee, which I'm on. So we started these kind of lean-in groups and just doing these kind of, we do one a week. I think we do quite a lot over the year, but we just run these discussions where where people were free to come in and just talk and go, look, what's going on? I mean, we had some certain themes, what's it like working from home, or, how's your tech and all that kind of stuff. But generally, it was a time when we all had to kind of recognise that we needed to connect more and talk more and be more realistic and not put on any fronts or any kind of, I'm fine. It's, we weren't really doing that fine. Kind of, a lot of people were suffering mentally quite a lot, I think. And so I think I have a lot of appreciation for the people who went out and kind of tried to pull that community together to talk more about it, do this.
Yeah. I think we're into a new phase now, though. It's like post-hangover of COVID, where I reckon that what we'll see is this, like, there's a sense of everyone wants to meet, which is a little bit frustrating because we have the Delta virus at the moment, the Delta strain or whatever. But I actually predict, Karen, that so it was interesting, and I'll tell you, like, on the statistics of the architecture social. So I was looking at the analytics yesterday. There are less people on the forum right now, and fair enough. The pubs have opened. We got lovely weather, and it's a great time to go meet people. So you shouldn't be on there that much right now. What the people are a lot on is actually the web traffic's up, and in particular, people are looking for jobs, and people want to see projects right now with the time of the year. So I feel like that there is a sense of opportunity out there, and I do feel like the architecture industry is come on a boom. So there's lots of jobs out there. I'm hearing the people getting jobs, and we're hiring at Ackroyd Lowry. Have you seen a similar trend at the moment in the last 2 or 3 months where things are looking more optimistic?
I definitely think there's a lot more optimism now, and I think that, I mean, you're making me think of the kind of there's this whole process of grief that you may be familiar with, because we've gone through this whole process in the last year. We started off in denial, and then we had kind of resistance, and then you kind of get into exploration, and now we're actually coming out the other end of that whole phase kind of thing. And now we're going into this is our time now that we've had this time to kind of reinvent ourselves and figure out and kind of think about, how do we want the new us to be? What's ahead of us? What do we want to change? How can we make this better? How can we take what we want to take with us and not leave some of this good stuff behind, kind of thing. So it's really a time when people are kind of embracing change now and doing something good with it and building on it, and either changing career or stepping into something new, or changing something about the environment, or just kind of just going, let's get out and restart. And so, yeah.
Well, it is an exciting time for that, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity. And what I've noticed as well, and I'm sure you've seen this as well. So from before, typically in my head, an architecture practice, you didn't work remote. You just didn't. You were in the office. I'm sure I was there. You've been there. I'm not on about treated badly or anything like that. You could be treated fantastically. What I'm on about, though, is the idea is that in an architecture practice, you are in. You have to be in. Many architecture practices be like, whoa, we do architecture, we need to be in. And what was interesting is, like, last year, that smashed that pretense in a lot of business owners' heads that actually businesses can survive. And I noticed a few leaders and a few of my clients, so directors, associate directors, and then I would ring them up and they would be like, Steve, I'm loving this because I don't have to travel to big meetings for 2 hours and say something and travel back. I'm on Zoom. But at the moment, I think it's a balance of, so it's been great to be at home, but now people are pining for that interaction, because I think you can totally get Zoom fatigue. I get it, where I'm like, oh my gosh, another computer, really? So it's interesting. In one sense, I think that the pandemic liberated the situation, because on one hand, it really has opened the questions for flexible working, and that's great for certain people in certain circumstances. If you're, a single parent or anything like that, or when you've got requirements in your life, the fact that now you can work from home some days, and hours aren't so fixed is fantastic. But at the other end of the scale, there's going to be a point now where I think things are going to normalize a bit. So do you have any thoughts on the direction that businesses are going to go, Karen? Or would you have any like observations or advice in terms of like leadership or structure, or if anyone's working in a practice, how they should go about this new setting and this new era that we're just
I think
going
it's going to be a
into?
real hybrid now. And I'm really glad that this, the good part of this pandemic has been this breaking
Yeah.
open that whole taboo of, because
Yeah.
this is something that especially women in architecture were saying for ages, we don't have to be in the office to get something done, kind
Yeah.
of thing. And I'm just so glad we've kind of
Yeah.
bust that whole thing open and said, we can do it successfully from home. But we also now realise that we have this big need to collaborate and come together and, work in the office in a different way, not just bums on seats, but actually being there to be as a team and to innovate together. So, and I think people, the companies I know are just trying to work out how that's going to look at the moment. How many days a week do you want to be at home, and when you're going to come in, and how are we going to get certain people in on certain days, and all a bit up in the air kind of thing. And I think they just need an attitude of experimentation. You just need to think, we don't need to come up with solution. We just need to be experimental and try and see what works and take our time and finding the good balance for.
Yeah, I think you're right. What I would say is that I think the practices that will experiment, as you put it, you've got a real good chance of getting massive rewards to it, because I do think that as well as some very, very talented architects would be looking for a degree of flexibility. And so a practice which is kind of open to these scenarios will, from my point of view, because of my background, is, predominantly in the recruitment, hiring people, attracting people. But that level of flexibility is going to be extremely attractive. At the same time, you're right, though. You want to get the magic of like being in the office, kind of working together on something, but then, being at home. So I think that's going to be the next chapter. And so what I was going to ask you as well, because do you think in terms of your business before, because we're with consulting and career coaching, was a lot of it in person, and has a lot of it in the last year been digital? Have you seen a change yourself in how coaching has been delivered to professionals and practices?
Well, unless I had a client from overseas, then all of my coaching was mainly face to face, and we would just meet cafes all over London, kind of thing. It was mostly London based, and anybody outside of London, it would be on Skype, because Zoom wasn't there then until it was just Skype kind of thing. And people really liked that face-to-face contact. But it was, at the point of change, it was very easy to make the shift into Zoom. I assume when, I probably had a week or two of Skype and then went, oh, what's this new software? Everyone's Zooming now. Let's get into Zoom. So I had to go on that huge learning curve of suddenly, trying to figure out how to use Zoom, which was great. Because everybody could make mistakes. Isn't that great when you can learn something and you're really free to make mistakes? And we're still going, you're on mute. We're still making mistakes and we accept it. I love that as well. So the shift.
Sorry. No, go ahead. Please,
so the shift
continue.
from face-to-face to online was very easy for my clients to make, I think. And now I haven't had any requests yet. Or can we go I'm dying to go face-to-face. Can we? I know that I'm kind of looking forward to going back face-to-face because I've been working at home for, 10 years or so, and I'm in my garden studio kind of thing. And I miss going into town. I miss going to cafes. I miss seeing London. I miss going, here I am today. I'm in this part of London kind of thing. Well, this is the cafe I'm in or whatever, and taking photos of that kind of thing. I miss getting out there.
Well, that's what I was going to say. And I think we witnessed there where I kind of interrupted you accidentally. That's one of the downsides of Zoom because you have that natural lag. And luckily we've all accommodated to it. So we know it's not rudeness. It's that lag, but the Zoomisms it is a bit strange. And I remember when I started 2 months ago working at Accurate Larry, I make an effort to go into the office. And yeah, it was a bit bizarre though, because I started getting acclimatized to being in a Zoom culture. It was amazing. But then that was the novelty. I'm like, I'm going into an office. Oh my gosh. And then I was like, what am I going to wear? Or, and then I was like packing my bag. It was like I was like, not used to this because we got used to that Zoom world. And what's interesting is that I started doing the coaching. Mine's a little bit different. It's more focused on CV and portfolio and getting jobs. I mean, that's kind of like my background. And to me, it does seem tailor-made to Zoom, doesn't it? But at the same time, I still think that you miss certain nuances that you get in person. So I think like Zoom is amazing because like the way me and you plugged into this not on Zoom, but it's a very similar thing to Zoom. It's amazing that we can get a conversation going really quickly, book it in the calendar, and that's awesome. But you're right, it doesn't quite replace being in person. And so when I'm hiring at Accurate Larry now, we're looking for a strategic role. And the first thing that everyone Zoom's amazing because you can meet each other. But when you're in person, we're real people and it's totally different.
Yeah. I mean, when I get new clients, it would always be like our first meeting, our first kind of just conversation has to be in person. We meet in person. And then I'm like, if you want to go on Zoom after that, you're cool. But at least we've met in person. We've got a good idea about each other. And there's something different about it. And you're right, when on Zoom, there's a whole different etiquette that we've had to deal with. And
have you been on Clubhouse, Karen? It's strange. Have you been on Clubhouse? That's a totally
I've resisted that. I'm like, how many things do I have to get hang of? And now there's another one.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no. I'm getting too old for this. I'm like, I can't stick with the ones that I like at the moment. I think there's people like you who are like the early adopters. They're like, yeah, I'm in. I'll go for it. I'll go try it. And there's people like me who lag behind. This is why I shouldn't be in BIM. This is why I'm no longer there. People like me are like, no, I'm a bit more lazy than that. I'll let you figure out all the things and see whether it's worth it, and then I'll come in.
Well, that's sweet of you to say, but I really am someone in the middle. So on one hand, I realize you've got to adapt certain technologies and it's good to be at the forefront. But at the same time, I'm like you sometimes. I'm just like, I resisted Clubhouse for ages and then I did it. And even now, though, I do think that its time is it's dwindling because basically all these other big companies like Spotify and Facebook are copying it, right? So it had something special at the time. And I think it had the magic of meeting people in person and an air of exclusivity. And so exclusivity is a bit of a bittersweet thing because on one hand, there's something exciting about it, but then there's also something incredibly pretentious about it. So, but now the platform has kind of opened up, which is much more inclusive, which in essence is amazing. Now it's not so, it hasn't got the magic.
Can you tell me though, because I don't know much about it, you're just listening to each other. Is that right? You're not seeing each other. You're just listening.
So you're totally listening. So the one brilliant thing about listening is that you can be in your pajamas or whatever, right? Because it's got that sense of it. And the other thing about it being audio only is that where you'd enjoy it and you do well is that you're a listener. So it really, because you're not, the video's gone, it really gets the concentration going. And also then it puts a massive flow. And especially if you have a few people on the chair or the audience. So imagine it's a bit like a seminar. So you've done a few of these now. There's an art form to like talking on a panel and moving the room around and trying not to interrupt each other and compliment each other and keeping the flow. So there's definitely an art form to it. But at the same time, I think that what's good is you've got the audio conversation, but I'm not convinced it's going to last. And I think that it was an amazing replacement for that human interaction. And now that we're going out of lockdown, then, I mean, the ultimate form of Clubhouse is actually going to your Reba Future Architects event where you're there. It's the same thing, So I think it has served a purpose, but will it survive in this next wave? I don't know. And, like with the architecture social, the community is still, the core members of the community are still there, but less people are on it right now. And that's fine, because I think in business, you have to evolve and you have to keep changing, which is where you were saying about the software. So you have to adapt, but at the same time, as well, from being in a heavy technology role before, you can't just change tech for the same reason. It's a tool, so it's got to facilitate a purpose. So there's I'm like you, there's a balance to me. I'm happy to change or happy to do something if there's something there, but to get on the next trend for the sake of the next trend, it's probably not worth it. But what I was going to say is, it's always unfair that podcasts can go one way. Do you have any questions that you'd like to ask me? That would be a bit of fun.
Yeah, I do actually. I do have a question for you, because you're doing the whole recruitment thing. I've always wondered, because this is something that really irks me slightly, and you'll be answering this not really for me, but for the listeners, I guess, is that when you get in front of somebody who's been in a company, when you're being interviewed by someone who's been in the same company for 10, 20 years or something, and then they look at your CV and they see that gap, and they're like, why did you, what's that gap for, kind of thing, and whether it's maternity leave or whatever it is. And it's that real sense of, I've been in the same company for 20 years and there's no gaps on my, and there's I feel like there's a real disconnect from that type of people to the CVs that we should see today, which should have lots of gaps and lots of changes and lots of opportunities and different things in it, and it shouldn't be this kind of perfect list of boom boom and I just don't think they get it, and I'm just wondering.
I would say. My views on that. I've seen the two sides of the coin. To be really honest, I've totally seen CVs where they have a gap. My first reaction will be, "What is the gap?" And then I can send that CV off to the employer, and the first reaction will be, "What happened in that gap?" Or the infamous one, I think, is freelancing. So I've done freelancing. I do freelancing now, but also I think that let me say that maybe glass half empty look at freelancing would mean that you were doing nothing, right? We know it's not, but I think that some employers can look at it that way. My advice is, if you've had a gap, embrace it, and you should hit it head on. So anything like this, if you got any if there's a gap, you've highlighted it now, it's going to be brought up. So my advice is you embrace that gap. So a really good example is my friend who, exactly like you said, he worked at a company for 6 years and he went all the way from the bottom line to management. Okay, this wasn't architecture, but it's the same thing. He's a very close friend of mine. And so then he went traveling for 2 years on a motorcycle. He saved up 20,000 or whatever, and he just went on this motorcycle, and he came back for a job. And what I loved is that he put on his CV, 2 years traveling the world on my motorcycle, learned a lot, experienced a lot, now ready to return. And because he kind of hit it head on, then no one was like, "Oh, what was this 2-year gap?" Because he said, "I went, motorcycling, and I can tell you what countries I was being. I can tell you the stories I've got," and it really debunked that stigma. And so my advice is that whenever you got a gap, because I've had one or two before, and you could just say that you were rejigging where you're at. I remember when I left, because you were familiar, I touched upon it briefly before we started this. I used to run a recruitment company with someone else, and when we went our separate ways, I had to kind of reevaluate what was important to me, and there was a little gap there. And so I'm happy to talk about that gap, because it was really important at the time. And if I continued working, then I felt that I would keep going in the trajectory, which wouldn't have been the right thing. So the first thing that comes to my head is that whenever you got a gap, embrace it. And you're right that if for instance you've worked somewhere for a long period of time, that's amazing. So I was at a McDonald's company for nearly 4 years. And what I learned is that I think the longer you are at a practice for a longer period of time, you do see stuff that you had not seen before. Because when I was a part one, it's great because you do 1 year at somewhere, and part two, you do 2 years. But I think in like that third and fourth year, and I'm sure you've seen this a lot, Karen, with professionals, it's this interesting journey where you're in that company and you can make a lot of differences within, and you can do a lot of this stuff that you wouldn't have had exposure to in the first year or two. So I would say, based on your analogy there, of if you've worked at some place for a long time, that's an amazing accomplishment. It shows that you're loyal, it's dedicated. It shows that you're committed to the task and you've tried to make changes, and then you're looking for a new role. And the other thing, that if you've had a gap, for instance, the other ones that I see a lot, which particularly affects mothers. So it's one good thing out of this pandemic is that level of flexibility, because I always found architecture really tricky for a mother's returning to work, and that could be an uphill battle of like, why did you take the time out, and why did you do this? And really, you shouldn't have to answer any questions like that because you've had family. It's like that's life. And I think that now that stuff like that, it's really important to embrace family, and that is a reason that you can say you've had time out. You're like, well, I've set up my family, and I've been involved in my child's life, which is really important to me, and I'm ready to go to work. And I did a lot of experience before, and I'm ready to pick it up. And it shouldn't be so hard.
What about? I mean, these are kind of like, I think they're quite good gaps to have. They can be good experience. But what if the gap is? What if the gap was caused by a not so good experience? And what if the gap was?
Yeah,
I didn't get on with my last company. They fired me. I went into spiraled into depression or whatever. And it's like, yeah, what do you say about that gap? Is it okay these days, because we're talking more about mental health? Is it okay to bring up something like, to be bold, as you say, and to own that gap? Because we can always say, look, this is what happened, I learned from it. But is the intent, is the impact, coming off right, kind of thing?
Good. Yeah, good question. I'll be really upfront. So I touched upon my old recruitment business. Well, we left differences of opinion, and I think that there's a fine line where I learned a lot from that. But at the time, it was an incredibly stressful job. It was incredibly stressful running a company and having a business partner, and having a difference of opinion of where you want to take the company, and splitting up for what X, Y, Z reason. So I'm happy to talk about that now. At the same time, where you have to be, where this is a really tricky minefield, is that I think that there's two things, because if you're still dwelling on these things, it can seem negative in an interview. So if I started disparaging my ex-business partner, you can't prove that one way or another. And it's like inserting you in the middle of an argument. So it's you can get into this tricky personal zone. So you wouldn't want to do that. My advice, this is just from my opinion, is that what I talk about is that technically, while that business failed in the end, or we wound it up, is that I learned so much. I learned how to run a business. I jumped in. We had everything going. It made a profit, and I gained so much exposure. I ran a team. I hired people. I got the contract in place. I made sure that we weren't sued, and then I made some great relationships with companies, and we hired an office, and it was a completely wild ride, but it was amazing. And after that, I had to take stock. So I think like there's a subtle difference there so I could even joke and laugh and say, Karen, that business was wound up. It was a failure, but it was a fantastic failure. And I think those lessons I learned from it, I'm more than happy to talk about because they're amazing. But why I think is is not a good exercise is talking about anything personal with someone else, because I have to be respectful of there were two people there, two people's opinions, and also it's not good for anyone. So the worst thing I see that people can do in an interview is go, I left my old practice. The directors are just they were so sexist and didn't do this and that to me, and because that can really, it might even be true, but it's not the right time or place. Or it's kind of insert. It's like when someone, that your friends goes like, isn't Jane's husband and you're like, ugh, I don't know how I feel about this because I'm in the middle. I think what I would do is draw upon those experiences, the positives and the negatives, but you can be upfront that it failed for XYZ, and that's what you learned from it. So that's kind of my answer in a roundabout way. So to summarize, I think you should draw in the positives to it, acknowledge it didn't work for XYZ reasons, and what you've learned from it in the future. But what I wouldn't do is make specific or accusations against people or business that you can't back up. So if you can't back it up, don't do it. And even if you could back it up, it can put a negative thing on the interview, whereas the interview really is about you and them. It's about how you can make a difference in the interviewer's company and you can solve their problems based upon your experience. And therefore, failing, in my opinion, can be amazing lessons. And so because of that experience I had before, it takes a lot to shake me up now. You can, if you send me a legal letter, I'm not scared anymore because I'll be like, okay, why? And okay, let's tackle this on. Whereas before I'd be like, oh my gosh, what? And then because of that business acumen that I've learned, it's like, well, I've seen loads of these. I've seen all this stuff, and let's just go through it together and let's work out the problem. So I don't know, roundabout answer, but was that helpful?
Yeah, well, I hope so. Yeah. I think there's, I think if I want to speak to everybody out there who's listening kind of thing, I think the good thing to know about this is that when you work with a coach, you can role play all this and you can practice those conversations. And that's really important, figuring out what you're going to say and doing that 5 times over, because it's never going to be, and getting really comfortable with being bold and focusing on those positives that you got out of it. Because I think when I look at all the dips in my career, I went, they could be really low, but the highs that came after it, the learning that came after it can be tremendous if you take that time to kind of reflect on what happened and stuff.
Amazing. But, well, I think we cover a lot here, and I'm conscious of we've got some exciting times ahead now that hopefully things are easing up. So before we find out where people can contact you, Karen, what are you going to be up to for the next few weeks and months? Do you have any exciting ideas or anything that you'd like to do that we can keep an eye on? Well,
I'm kind of, now that I've kind of cleared the last 6 months of kind of leadership conferences, I'm still got a few more up my sleeve, but I'm kind of thinking, what's my next project going to be? What's it? And I'm not going to say what it is, but I'll put this out there. I'm going to be looking to talk to architects who are really organized, who think they're really super organized. I want to talk. I'm going to need to talk to you and kind of,
amazing
tips and tricks. And at the end of it, that might come out of, I really want to do something solid with this kind of thing. But I'm not going to, I don't know if that sounds so vague, but it's kind of, I'm just forming in my brain.
Yeah. It's not, I'm going to have a day where
I kind of brainstorm and kind of go, is this worth doing? I need to interview some people. I need to interview some architects and ask them, is this worth me doing for you? Because at the end of the result, it's going to produce something for the architects to be better at their work. So
that's amazing. Yeah, I think if you can bend the architect rule for 1 second, who's really good at this stuff. And I know Sana the Bassam from with Scale Blog. Holy moly, that Sana is a fantastic, organized individual. Maybe you should drop Sana a message on your project. It's a productivity queen of architecture, I reckon. Yeah, honestly, exactly. It's impressive.
Exactly. Yeah. I agree with you there. Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. Well, I love that teaser. So for any organized architects out there, drop Karen a message. And for anyone else that wants to learn more about what you do, how can someone get in touch with you and find out about SleepingGiant?
Well, I think you can always drop me a line. So that's Karen at sleepinggiant-consulting.com. You can look me up on LinkedIn because I'm there a lot. I'm there daily,
Yeah.
so you can always just drop me a message there. I'm on Instagram, which I kind of like because I like taking photos, really.
Oh, cool.
And I just like taking photos. And that's SleepingGiant _ Karen. And you might see me on Twitter, but don't go there. I'm not a Twitter person. No.
Yeah, I don't like it either. I can find it can veer on negativity a lot as well, can't it? You know, I find
When I
Twitter.
do go in there, it's to complain about.
Yeah, I've done that. It is really good with. I have a landlord, and there was a massive leak, and then I couldn't get anywhere. And the moment I took a picture and put it on Twitter, it was fixed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to find out, wants to get in contact with you, they can do that. And if they want to see who me and you are complaining about, it will be on Twitter. But probably don't worry, it'll just be one or two things.
I'm not going to read it.
Yeah, look, amazing. Thank you so much, Karen. I really admire what you've done. And what I would say as well, while I do a little bit of CV and portfolio coaching, I aspire to what you've done. And I've always thought it was great. And so as we touched upon just before recording this, when my ex-colleague showed me the Sleeping Giant website before and said, you need to check out Karen, it's going to be great. And I was like, oh, Sleeping Giant looks interesting. All that time, it's amazing to see all the stuff you're up to, and well done on your latest Reba seminars. I can't wait to see your organized project. It won't be me because I'm the most disorganized person in the world, but maybe I'll get a few tips from it. Thank you so much, Karen. And if you stay...
Thank you very much for having me on. I really enjoy. I feel like we could keep going, having this conversation all afternoon. It could just keep, going and going.
Yeah. Well, we can do a live stream sometime on your project, maybe, the organized, and I'll get my pen and paper ready. But stay on the line. I am going to end the podcast now. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I forget we've got the video here as well, so I really appreciate that. And have a fantastic day wherever you are. Thank you.